Vienna in January of 1980 was cold as hell and gray as concrete. Snow piled up against the building corners, turned to black slush by midday, froze solid again by nightfall. The whole city looked like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to break loose. East and west rubbing shoulders every day, spies crawling over each other like ants on a drop sandwich, everyone watching everyone else, nobody trusting a damn soul. I was sitting in a cafe 2 blocks from the Ringstrasse, drinking coffee that tasted like burnt dirt, watching the street through windows fogged up from the heat inside. My cover was solid mining equipment sales representative for a German firm, legitimate business cards, real office in Stuttgart, real contracts with real companies, the kind of cover that holds up under scrutiny because it's 95% true. The 5% that's a lie is the part that matters. The man sitting across from me was CIA. His name doesn't matter anymore. What mattered was what he'd just told me. We want you to walk into Soviet intelligence and offer yourself up, he said. Kept his voice low, casual, like he was talking about the weather or the price of schnitzel. Make them think you're genuine, make them think you want to defect. I looked at him, took a sip of the bad coffee, let the idea settle in my head for a minute. You want me to be a dangle? I said. We want you to be the most convincing son of a bitch they've ever seen, he said. We need to know how they process defectors, how they verify, how they compartmentalize. We need inside their system. And if they figure out I'm not genuine, he didn't answer that. Didn't need to. We both knew what happened to suspected double agents in Soviet custody. Nothing quick, nothing clean, nothing you'd want your worst enemy to experience. And I've had some goddamn bad enemies. Why me? I asked. Because you've been in the shit long enough to sell it, he said. Because you know how operators think. Because you're old enough that the Soviets will believe you're disillusioned with the agency. And because you've got the one thing every good dangle needs, you don't quit when things go sideways. That last part got my attention. Not because it was flattery, because it was true. My only real talent in this business has always been that I don't quit. I don't back down. I don't fold when the pressure comes on. That's it. That's the whole secret to a long career in SF and agency work. Never quit, never quit, never quit. What's the timeline? I asked. 6 months to build the approach, another 6 months to get inside their confidence, maybe a year total if everything goes perfectly. Nothing ever goes perfectly. No, he said. It doesn't. I finished the coffee, looked out at the gray Vienna street, watched people walking past bundled up against the cold, civilians living their civilian lives with no idea that right here in this cafe, 2 guys were talking about walking into the mouth of the beast and seeing if it would swallow them whole or spit them back out. What's the operational designation? I asked. Ironwood, he said. I nodded, thought about it for maybe 10 more seconds. Then I said what I always say when they ask me to volunteer for something that might get me killed or worse. I'm in, because that's what you do. You volunteer for everything going. You don't turn anything down. What sounds insignificant might be cover for something really good. What sounds dangerous might be the one operation that matters. You volunteer for everything, period. That's the rule. That's how you stay involved. That's how you become a warrior instead of just a guy who shows up for a paycheck. He slid a folder across the table, thin, maybe 20 pages inside. Read it tonight, he said. Burn it tomorrow. We start building your disillusionment profile next week. My what? Your reason for wanting to defect, he said. Why, Billy Wall, career SF and agency operator, suddenly wants to betray his country and go over to the Soviets. We need a story that holds up under interrogation, psychological profiling, stress testing, the whole works. I get to be a traitor, I said. You get to pretend to be one, he said. Big difference. Not to them, I said, if they catch on. He stood up, put on his coat, looked down at me with the kind of expression you see on guys who send other guys into bad situations and then go home to sleep in their own beds. Don't let them catch on, he said. Then he walked out into the cold Vienna afternoon, and left me sitting there with a folder full of lies I was supposed to memorize and sell like they were the truth. The first rule of a good cover story is it has to be believable. The second rule is it has to be checkable. The Soviets will verify everything they can verify, and if the pieces don't fit, they'll know you're full of shit before you even get through the first conversation. The third rule is the best lies are mostly truth with just enough fabrication to serve the mission. So we built my disillusionment profile on a foundation of real grievances and real history, then added just enough bitterness and just enough desperation to make it plausible that a career operator would flip. My legend went like this. Billy Waugh, former SF, former SOG, former everything that mattered in unconventional warfare during the 60s and 70s. Multiple tours in Southeast Asia. Decorations I couldn't talk about for operations I couldn't acknowledge. Skills in languages, weapons, tactics, and staying alive in environments where most men died. Then came the slow slide into obsolescence. Younger operators getting the good assignments. Budget cuts in the agency after Vietnam wound down. The bureaucrats taking over from the field operators. Assignments that were beneath my skill level, courier work, dead drops, routine surveillance. The indignity of being sidelined while desk jockeys made decisions about operations they'd never run themselves. Financial pressure. Medical bills for a wife with chronic health issues. This part was fabrication. I wasn't married, but the Soviets wouldn't know that. Resentment building up over years of being used and discarded. A man in his 50s facing the reality that his government didn't value his sacrifice anymore. And finally, the breaking point. Being passed over for a station chief position in favor of a younger officer with half my experience and none of my operational background. The final insult that pushed me from disillusionment into active betrayal, it was a good story. Solid enough to hold up, bitter enough to be believable, specific enough to verify the parts that were true, vague enough to hide the parts that weren't. We spent 3 weeks rehearsing it, role-playing interrogations, stress interviews where they'd scream questions at me in Russian and German and broken English, trying to trip me up, looking for inconsistencies. They'd bring in psychologists to analyze my body language, my word choice, my emotional responses. I failed the first 4 sessions, came across too confident, too controlled, a man who's genuinely broken, doesn't have that kind of operational discipline in his answers. You need to be angry, the lead psychologist told me. Not tactical, angry, hurt, betrayed. This isn't a briefing. This is a man justifying treason to himself. So I dug into it, found the real anger underneath the cover story. Thought about every time I'd been passed over for promotion, every operation that went to hell because some headquarters weenie made a decision based on political considerations instead of operational reality. Every young hotshot who got credit for work that older operators had set up for them, I let that anger come up, let it show in my voice, let it crack through the professional veneer I'd spent 30 years building. By the 6th session, I had it down. The psychologist nodded, made notes, looked satisfied. That'll work, he said. Now you just have to sell it to the KGB. The approach vector was simple. I'd make contact through a cutout in East Berlin, a former Stasi officer who was on the CIA payroll but who the KGB thought was their asset. Triple agent bullshit that made my head hurt when they explained the whole network, but the bottom line was simple. This guy would vouch for me to his Soviet handlers, tell him he had to walk in. An American with access who wanted to come over, they'd be suspicious as hell. Walk-ins are always suspect. Could be a trap, could be a plant, could be a disturbed individual with no real access who just wants attention. The Soviets would probe and test and verify before they committed to bringing me in. That's what we wanted. We wanted them to investigate Billy Waugh, check my background, confirm my bitterness, validate my access, build their confidence that I was genuine, because once they believed I was real, they'd open doors to show me how they operated, and that's when the real work would begin. East Berlin, in March of 1980, Looked like someone had taken a functioning city and beaten it half to death with a hammer. The buildings were gray concrete blocks. The streets were potholed and cracked. The air smelled like coal smoke and industrial waste. You could see the wall from almost anywhere in the Soviet sector. That obscene barrier cutting through the city like a scar, guard towers every 100 meters, minefields and death strips, and shoot-to-kill orders for anyone who tried to cross. I came through Checkpoint Charlie on my mining equipment sales cover. Legitimate business visa. Meetings scheduled with East German mining cooperatives about drill bits and extraction machinery. All of it real. All of it documented. All of it providing plausible reason for Billy Waugh to be in Soviet-controlled territory. The cutout's name was Werner. 50s, balding, nervous energy that made him chain smoke unfiltered cigarettes and fidget with his lighter. We met in a workers' cafe near Alexanderplatz, both of us pretending to read newspapers while we talked in low German. They'll want to see you next week, Werner said. 2 officers, mid-level, smart, very, very careful. Where? Safe house in Pankow, residential neighborhood. You'll come alone. They'll search you. Record everything. Don't bring anything except your story. What did you tell them about me? That you approached me 6 weeks ago. That you claimed to have access to American intelligence operations in Central Europe. That you wanted asylum and compensation. That you seemed genuine, but I couldn't verify without their help. And they believed you? Werner smiled, stubbed out his cigarette, and immediately lit another one. They believe I'm theirs, he said. So they believe I'm bringing them a prize. Whether they believe you is your problem. Fair enough. The meeting was set for Tuesday afternoon, 2 o'clock. I showed up 15 minutes early, walked the perimeter of the neighborhood, checked sight lines and exit routes the way you do when you're walking into potential hostile territory. Old habits, SF habits, the kind of habits that keep you alive when things go to shit. The safe house was a 3rd-floor apartment in a building that looked like every other building on the block. Soviet-style concrete, tiny windows, exterior stairwell. I went up the stairs, knocked on the door, marked 3B, waited. The man who opened the door was maybe 40, short hair, hard eyes, suit that fit well enough to tell me he wasn't some low-level bureaucrat. He looked me over like I was livestock at an auction, then stepped aside and gestured me in. The apartment was sparse. Table, 4 chairs, 1 lamp, recording equipment, visible on a side table. They weren't even pretending this wasn't being documented. Another man sat at the table, older, 50s maybe, with a kind of face that seemed too much to be surprised by anything anymore. Sit down, Mr. Waugh, the older one said in English. American English. Good accent. Probably trained in the States somewhere. We have questions. I sat down, put my hands on the table where they could see them, waited. Werner tells us you wish to discuss employment opportunities with Soviet intelligence, the older one said. Why? Here we go. Because the CIA threw me away, I said. Let the anger come through. Let it be real. 30 years in the field. Southeast Asia, Africa, Europe, unconventional warfare, training indigenous forces, running assets, getting my ass shot at in places you've never heard of, and what do I have to show for it? Tell us, the younger one said. A desk job in Vienna, I said. Courier runs, babysitting diplomats, watching younger officers' kids who never heard a shot fired in anger get promoted over me, watching desk jockeys make decisions that get good operators killed. And when I complained, when I pushed back, you know what they told me? They waited. They told me I was too old, I said. They told me the game had changed. They told me to be grateful I still had a job at all. Then they passed me over for station chief in favor of some Ivy League prick who's never run an operation in his goddamn life. The older one made notes. The younger one just watched me. You want revenge, the younger one said. I want what I'm worth, I said. I want recognition. I want to be involved in something that matters. Your service values experience. Your service promotes based on capability, not politics. I can give you operational intelligence on American activities in Europe. I can give you access to CIA methodology. I can give you everything I learned in 30 years. And in exchange, you can give me the respect my own country won't. It was a good speech, bitter enough to be real, specific enough to be credible. I could see them processing it, running it against whatever psychological profile they'd built on career intelligence officers who defect. What kind of access do you currently have? The older one asked. Limited, I said. Courier work means I see classified documents I'm transporting. I still have contact with active case officers who trust me because of my history. I know safe house locations, communication protocols, dead drop sites. I'm not running operations anymore, but I'm still in the network, still trusted for now. For now, the younger one repeated. They're phasing me out. I said, another year, maybe 2, and I'll be fully retired, pensioned off, forgotten. This is my window. This is when I still have value to offer. The older one and younger one exchanged a look, some kind of silent communication that comes from working together long enough to read each other without words. We will need to verify your claims, the older one said. Background, access, motivation. This will take time. How much time? Weeks, perhaps months. We will contact you through Werner when we are ready to proceed. In the meantime, you will continue your normal duties. You will not attempt to contact us directly. You will not deviate from your established patterns. Do you understand? I understand. If you are lying to us, Mr. Wall, the younger one said, if this is some American intelligence operation to penetrate our service, we will discover it. And then we will make an example of you that will discourage others from attempting similar deceptions. I looked him right in the eye, let him see whatever he wanted to see there. I'm not lying, I said. I'm just done being treated like shit by people who've never done what I've done. They let me go 20 minutes later. Searched me, first professional job, thorough, the kind of search that would find anything I'd tried to bring in. Found nothing, because I hadn't brought anything except my story and my anger. I walked back through East Berlin in the cold March afternoon, feeling the weight of what I'd just started settling on my shoulders like a heavy pack. The operation was live. I was in play. Now came the hard part, waiting for them to verify, investigate, and decide whether Billy Wall was genuine or whether he was the most elaborate lie American intelligence had ever tried to sell him. The Soviets didn't rush. That's not how they operated. They were patient, methodical to a degree that would drive most Americans crazy. But I understood it. Hell, I respected it. Good intelligence work is slow work. You verify everything. You check every claim. You look for the cracks in the story, the inconsistencies that reveal the lie underneath. For 6 weeks, nothing happened. I went back to Vienna, back to my cover job, back to my courier assignments, and my dead drops and my routine surveillance work, all of it documented. All of it exactly what Billy Wall, the disaffected CIA officer, would be doing while waiting for the Soviets to make up their minds. But I knew they were watching. Probably had been watching even before the East Berlin meeting. They'd be pulling every file they had on me, checking with their sources in Western intelligence services, looking at my operational history, my personal background, my financial situation, my psychological profile. The legend we'd built had to hold up under that scrutiny. The medical bills for the non-existent sick wife had to show up somewhere. The resentment over being passed over for promotion had to be reflected in CIA internal documents they might access through their own sources. The slow decline from active operator to desk jockey had to match what their research would tell them. The agency had done good work on the backstopping. They'd seeded enough real paper trail to confirm my disillusionment. Performance reviews that were lukewarm instead of excellent. A formal complaint I'd filed about being passed over for promotion, real document, real complaint, filed months before this operation even started. Medical insurance claims for a dependent that didn't actually exist but whose paperwork looked legitimate enough to pass casual inspection. All the pieces were in place. Now we just had to wait and see if the Soviets would buy what we were selling. Werner made contact in mid-April. Different cafe, different location, same nervous energy, and chain smoking. They verified most of your background, he said. Operations in Vietnam check out. Your complaint about the promotion checks out. The medical situation checks out. They're satisfied you are who you claim to be. So what's next? Now they want to test your access, Werner said. They want proof you can deliver what you're promising. They want intelligence product. Here's where it got dangerous. We'd anticipated this. The Soviets wouldn't commit resources to a defector who couldn't produce. They wanted proof of value. They wanted classified information that demonstrated access. So the agency had prepared a package, chicken feed, we called it, low-level intelligence that was real enough to verify but not valuable enough to cause actual damage. Old operational details on concluded cases. Names of CIA officers who were already known to Soviet intelligence. Technical information about communication protocols that had already been updated and changed. Enough truth to be convincing, not enough truth to be devastating. What do they want specifically? I asked. Current safe house locations in Vienna, Werner said. Communication schedules for active case officers, names and cover identities of CIA personnel operating in Central Europe. All of it was in the package we'd prepared. All of it was information the Soviets probably already had from other sources but wanted to verify through me. The test wasn't about the intelligence itself, it was about whether I could actually access and deliver it. I can get that, I said, but it'll take time. I can't just walk into the station and start pulling files. I have to do this carefully. They understand, Werner said. 2 weeks. They want the material in 2 weeks. I took longer than 2 weeks. I made them wait 3 weeks because a man who's desperate delivers fast and a man who's careful delivers slow. I was selling the image of a careful trader, someone who understood tradecraft well enough not to get caught. When I finally delivered the package through Werner, it was everything they'd asked for. Real intelligence, verifiable details, proof that Billy Wall had access to CIA operations and was willing to betray that access for the right price. The Soviets bought it. The next meeting was in Vienna this time. Different safe house, different officers, but the same careful process. They went through the intelligence I'd provided, asked detailed questions about how I'd obtained it, probed for inconsistencies in my story. I gave them what they wanted. Explained my access, my methods, my precautions. Showed them I understood operational security even while I was violating it. Demonstrated that I was a professional intelligence officer who happened to be switching sides, not some amateur who would get caught his first week. We are prepared to begin a formal relationship, the older officer finally said. But you will understand that trust must be built gradually. We will start with small assignments. Prove your reliability. Prove your access. Over time, as confidence grows, so will your responsibilities and your compensation. I understand. You will be given a contact schedule, specific dates and locations for meetings. You will provide intelligence reports at each meeting. You will not initiate contact outside of this schedule. You will not attempt to learn the identities of your handlers or the details of our operational methods beyond what we choose to share. Is this acceptable? It's acceptable. They slid a thin envelope across the table. Cash. American dollars. Not a fortune, but enough to show they were serious about paying for product. Your first payment, the older officer said. More will follow as you demonstrate value. I took the envelope, didn't count it, put it in my jacket pocket, and met his eyes. I'm not doing this for the money, I said. I'm doing this because my own service doesn't value what I can do anymore. But I won't say no to being paid fairly. He smiled, cold little smile that didn't reach his eyes. Everyone says they are not motivated by money, he said. But everyone takes the money when it is offered. Fair point. The meeting ended. I walked back into the Vienna evening feeling the weight of what I'd just accomplished. I was in. The Soviets had accepted me as a legitimate defector in place. I had access to their operational methods, their safe houses, their officer rotation schedules, their verification procedures, everything we'd hoped to learn. Now came the really dangerous part, staying in long enough to gather the intelligence we needed without getting caught. For the next 8 months, I lived a double life that would have driven most men insane. During the day, Billy Waugh, the CIA officer, ran courier assignments, attended briefings, maintained his cover as a loyal American intelligence operative. At night and on weekends, Billy Waugh, the Soviet asset, delivered classified information to KGB handlers who thought they owned him. The agency ran the operation with surgical precision. Every piece of intelligence I passed to the Soviets was carefully chosen, real enough to maintain my credibility, limited enough to prevent actual damage. We were feeding them a steady diet of chicken feed information that looked valuable but wasn't, details that confirmed what they already knew, intelligence that was technically accurate but operationally useless. And in exchange, I was getting a graduate level education in how Soviet intelligence processed their assets. I learned their safe house rotation patterns. They never used the same location more than twice in a row. Always had backup locations in case primary sites were compromised. Maintained at least 3 different apartments in any city where they ran active operations. I learned their communication protocols, dead drops in public parks, coded messages left in specific newspaper classified sections, emergency contact procedures that involved chalk marks on designated buildings. All of it was classic tradecraft, but seeing how they implemented it in practice gave us insights into their operational thinking. I learned their verification methods. Every piece of intelligence I provided was checked against their own sources. They'd test me by asking for information they already possessed, seeing if what I gave them matched what they knew. They'd probe my story with unexpected questions, looking for holes in my legend. And I learned their psychological manipulation techniques. My primary handler, the older officer I'd first met in East Berlin, was a master at building dependence and loyalty. He never threatened, never got angry when I couldn't deliver what they wanted. Instead, he was understanding, patient, almost fatherly, made me feel like I was part of something important, made me feel valued in a way my own service supposedly didn't anymore. It was textbook asset management. Build emotional connection, create sense of shared purpose, make the asset feel like they're on the winning team for the first time in their career. I understood exactly what he was doing, but I could see how it would work on someone who was genuinely disillusioned. We met every 3 weeks, different locations, different times, always careful, always professional. "You are doing good work," he told me in our 5th meeting. Midsummer now, Vienna hot and humid. The city full of tourists who had no idea they were walking through one of the world's most active espionage battlegrounds. "Your information has been very valuable to our operations." "Glad to hear it," I said. "We would like to expand your assignments," he said. "Beyond Vienna, there are CIA operations in other European cities that interest us. Munich, Frankfurt, Geneva. You have contacts in these locations?" "Some," I said. "Not as extensive as Vienna, but yes, I know people. We would like you to develop those contacts, learn what you can about American activities in these cities, station personnel, operational priorities, target lists." This was exactly what the agency wanted. The more the Soviets revealed about their intelligence priorities, the more we learned about what gaps they were trying to fill, what operations they were worried about, what American activities concerned them most. "That'll be more difficult," I said. "Asking too many questions will draw attention. I have to be careful." "Of course," he said. "We do not want you compromised. Your value to us depends on your continued access. Take your time, be careful, but gather what you can." He slid another envelope across the table. "Thicker this time, more money. Your compensation reflects your increased responsibilities," he said. The money didn't matter. The agency was monitoring every dollar, documenting every payment. It was evidence, proof of Soviet intelligence operations on Western soil, proof we could use later if we needed to burn their networks or expose their officers, but I took it anyway. Took it because that's what a real asset would do. Took it because staying in character meant selling every detail of being Billy Waugh the traitor, even when it made me want to take a shower. By September of 1980, I had access to 3 different Soviet safe house networks in Vienna. I knew the identities of 7 KGB officers operating under diplomatic cover. I documented their dead drop locations, their communication schedules, their preferred surveillance routes. I'd learned how they vetted new assets, how they paid their sources, how they compartmentalized information to protect operational security. I'd given the agency everything they'd asked for and more. But the operation couldn't last forever. The longer you run a dangle, the greater the risk of exposure. Eventually, the Soviets would ask me to do something I couldn't do, or they'd verify something that didn't check out, or one of their other sources would contradict information I'd provided. Intelligence work is a probability game. You can do everything right and still get caught because of factors outside your control. A defector from their service who knows your face. A surveillance team that spots you meeting with agency handlers. A random document check that reveals the inconsistency you didn't know existed. The agency's plan was to run me for 12 months, then extract, give me a plausible reason to disappear before the Soviets got suspicious. Maybe a fake medical emergency that required me to return to the States. Maybe a transfer to a new posting that took me out of their operational reach. But we never got that far. In October, my handler asked me to do something that crossed a line. We have identified an American intelligence officer operating in Budapest, he said. Young, relatively inexperienced, vulnerable to recruitment. We would like you to facilitate an introduction, develop the relationship, determine if this officer might be receptive to our approach. They were asking me to dangle another American to actively recruit someone else into Soviet service, not just provide intelligence, not just betray operations, actually bring another officer into their network. That was beyond the scope of what we'd agreed to. That was crossing from intelligence gathering into active betrayal, real betrayal, not the pretend kind. I told him I'd try, bought time, went back to my handlers and laid out the situation. We need to pull you, my case officer said. This is escalating beyond controlled intelligence. They're testing whether you'll bring them another asset. If you refuse, they'll know something's wrong. If you comply, we've got a real problem. How long do I have? 2 weeks. Maybe 3 if we're lucky. Then we stage your extraction. But the Soviets didn't give us 3 weeks. 2 days after my case officer told me they were planning the extraction, Werner contacted me with an emergency meeting request. Wrong time, wrong location, wrong procedure. Everything about it screamed danger. I went anyway, because walking away would have confirmed whatever suspicions they had, because operational discipline meant seeing it through to the end, even when the end looked bad. The meeting was in a warehouse district south of the Danube industrial area, deserted at night, no witnesses, no cameras, the kind of place where bad things happen and nobody hears about it until someone finds the body. I showed up armed, small automatic in an ankle holster. Wouldn't help much if they came at me with serious force, but it was better than nothing. Walked into the warehouse right on time, eyes adjusting to the dim light, looking for threats. 3 men were waiting, not my regular handlers. Different officers, harder faces, the kind of guys who handle problems instead of assets. Mr. Waugh, one of them said. Russian accent. Heavy. No attempt to hide it. We have questions about your recent activities. Here we go. What activities? I asked. You were observed meeting with known CIA personnel in Vienna last week. You were seen entering the American embassy on Tuesday. You made telephone calls to Washington using what appears to be covert communication protocols. Would you care to explain these observations? They'd been watching me, either suspected from the beginning or recently developed concerns. Either way, they knew, or thought they knew, and now they wanted me to confirm their suspicions before they decided what to do about it. I could have lied, could have tried to explain it away, could have given them some story about authorized cover development or legitimate CIA business that had nothing to do with my work for Soviet intelligence. But I'd been in the game long enough to know when you're caught and when you're not. And right now I was caught. Maybe not completely, maybe they only had pieces, but they had enough to know something was wrong. So I made a tactical decision. Not the decision they expected, not the decision that would save my cover, the decision that would keep me alive. Yeah, I said, I can explain it. I'm a dangle. Always have been. The CIA sent me to get inside your operational methods, to learn how you process defectors, to map your safe houses and identify your officers. And it worked. We got everything we needed. Dead silence in the warehouse. All three of them staring at me like I'd just grown a second head. You admit you have been deceiving us? One of them finally said. I admit I'm a professional intelligence officer running an authorized operation, I said. Same as you. Same game, different team. We both knew the risks. You suspected it or you wouldn't have called this meeting. So here's what happens next. You let me walk out of here. I go back to my service. You go back to yours. We both learned something from this. Nobody has to get hurt. The lead officer smiled. Cold, cold smile. The kind of smile that meant he was about to enjoy what came next. I do not think you understand your situation, Mr. Wall, he said. You are on our territory, in a location of our choosing, with no backup, no surveillance, no witnesses. We could make you disappear tonight and your agency would never know what happened to you. They'd know, I said. They're watching this location right now. Thermal imaging from across the river. Directional microphones picking up every word we're saying. If I don't walk out of here in the next 10 minutes, this warehouse becomes an international incident. You really want to explain to Moscow why you created a diplomatic crisis over one burned operation? I was bluffing, completely bluffing. There was no surveillance, no backup, no thermal imaging, just me and 3 Soviet intelligence officers in a warehouse where nobody could hear me scream. But I sold it hard, sold it with the confidence of a man who knows his service has his back. Sold it with the kind of operational certainty that makes people doubt their own intelligence even when they know they're right. The lead officer studied me, calculating, running probabilities, trying to decide if I was lying or if he was about to make a mistake that would end his career. Finally, he stepped aside. Get out, he said. If we see you in Vienna again, if we encounter you anywhere in Eastern Europe, if we have any indication that you are continuing operations against Soviet interests, we will not be so generous. I walked past him. Didn't run, didn't look back, just walked at a normal pace like a man who wasn't scared shitless about what had almost just happened. Got outside, got to my car, drove back across the river into the western sectors, checking my mirrors every 30 seconds, waiting for pursuit that never came. Made it back to the safe house where my case officer was waiting. You're blown, I told him. Whole operation's blown. They know I'm a dangle. Confronted me in a warehouse. I bluffed my way out, but we're done. He looked at me like he was trying to decide if I was serious or if I'd completely lost my mind. You walked into a meeting where they suspected you and just told them the truth? Told them enough truth to establish that killing me would be more trouble than it was worth? I said, sometimes the best move is the one they don't expect. They were ready for me to keep lying to try to salvage the operation. I gave them a different play. They took it. Jesus Christ, he said. We got what we needed anyway, I said. 8 months inside their system. Safe house networks mapped, officers identified, operational methods documented. The fact that they figured it out at the end doesn't invalidate the intelligence we collected before that. He sat down, rubbed his face, looked at me with the expression of a man who's just watched someone pull off something impossible through a combination of skill and dumb goddamn luck. "You're done with Vienna," he said. "Extraction starts tonight. We'll have you out of Austria by morning. New posting, new identity. Let this cool down for a year or two before we figure out what to do with you next." They pulled me out through Munich. False passport, changed appearance, routine commercial flight to Frankfurt, and then on to the States. By the time the Soviets realized I'd left Vienna, I was already drinking coffee in a CIA safe house in suburban Virginia, getting debriefed by officers who wanted every detail of what I'd seen and learned during those 8 months inside Soviet intelligence operations. The debrief took 3 weeks. They went through everything, every meeting, every conversation, every piece of intelligence I'd gathered about KGB operational methods, safe house procedures, officer identities, communication protocols, verification techniques, and asset management strategies. They were particularly interested in the psychological manipulation tactics my handler had used, the way he'd built rapport and dependency, the way he'd made me feel valued and important, the techniques they used to turn disaffected officers into productive assets. "This is textbook Soviet methodology," the debrief officer said, making notes as I walked him through another session. "But seeing it applied in real time, documented from inside the relationship, gives us insights we couldn't get any other way." "Did we get what we needed?" I asked. "We got more than we needed," he said. "Safe house locations in 5 cities. Identities of 23 KGB officers operating under diplomatic cover. Communication protocols that we can now monitor and potentially exploit. Asset verification procedures that tell us how they're checking their other sources. This operation was a complete success, even though they figured it out at the end." "Especially because they figured it out at the end," he said. "Now we know what triggers their suspicions, what verification methods caught you, what mistakes to avoid in future operations. The fact that they confronted you instead of quietly cutting you loose tells us they weren't completely certain. That's valuable information too. Maybe it was valuable. Maybe the whole thing had been worth the risk." But sitting there in that safe house, going through the details again and again, I couldn't help thinking about how close it had come to going the other way. If those 3 officers in the warehouse had decided to take me instead of letting me walk, if they'd called my bluff about surveillance and backup, if they'd been willing to risk the international incident for the satisfaction of making an example out of a dangle who'd fooled them for 8 months, I'd be in a cell somewhere east of the Iron Curtain, getting interrogated, getting broken down, getting turned into propaganda about American intelligence failures and Soviet counterintelligence successes. That's the thing about this work that civilians never understand. The difference between success and catastrophic failure is often just one decision, one moment, one conversation where you make the right call or the wrong call, and everything changes. I'd made the right call in that warehouse, told them the truth when lying would have been expected, bluffed about backup when I had none, walked out when walking out seemed impossible, but it could have gone the other way so goddamn easily. 3 weeks after I finished the debrief, they offered me a new assignment. Different region, different cover, different operational focus. The same question they'd been asking me since I was 22 years old. "Will you volunteer for this?" And I gave the same answer I'd always given. Yes. Because that's what warriors do. We volunteer for everything going. We don't turn anything down. We don't play it safe. We don't calculate the odds and decide to sit this one out because the risk is too high. The Ironwood operation taught me something I already knew but had to relearn. Being involved always carries risk. Walking into Soviet intelligence is a dangle. Running operations in denied territory. Doing the work that matters instead of the work that's safe. All of it is dangerous. All of it could go wrong. All of it might be the mission that doesn't come back from, but the alternative is worse. The alternative is sitting on the sidelines while other people do the real work. The alternative is playing it safe and dying slowly from boredom and irrelevance instead of quickly from enemy action. I'd rather die involved than live disconnected. That's not bravado. That's not machismo. That's just reality. A warrior is defined by the desire to be in the shit, not by how many enemies they've killed or how many medals they've earned. The desire to be involved, to be present when things matter, to volunteer for the dangerous stuff because that's where the real work happens. Never quit is part of it. Physical fitness is part of it. Language skills and tactical knowledge and operational discipline are all part of it. But underneath all of that is the fundamental choice. Do you want to be involved or don't you? I wanted to be involved. Still do. That desire didn't go away when I got older. Didn't diminish when operations got more dangerous. Didn't fade when the odds got worse and the missions got harder. If anything, it got stronger. Because the older you get, the clearer it becomes how rare it is to do work that actually matters. How few people get the chance to be involved in operations that change outcomes instead of just filling time. The Soviets thought I was a traitor. My handlers knew I was a dangle. But underneath all the deception and tradecraft, I was just doing what I'd always done, volunteering for the mission that needed doing. Getting involved when involvement was required, staying in the game instead of watching from the bench. That's the warrior definition. That's the whole secret. Volunteer for everything. Never quit. Stay involved no matter what. Everything else is just details. The Ironwood operation went into the classified archives with a success designation. The intelligence we gathered led to the identification and eventual expulsion of 17 Soviet intelligence officers from Western Europe. The safe house networks we mapped got rolled up. The communication protocols we documented got compromised. The asset management techniques we studied got turned into training material for our own operations. By any objective measure, it worked. But here's what they don't put in the official reports. I walked into that warehouse in Vienna not knowing if I'd walk back out. Made a tactical decision in real time based on incomplete information and pure operational instinct. Bluffed my way through a confrontation that could have ended with me in a Soviet prison getting turned inside out by professionals who are very, very good at breaking people down. And I'd do it again tomorrow. Not because I'm fearless, not because I don't understand the risks, not because I think I'm invincible or special or immune to the consequences of this work. I'd do it again because that's what the job requires. Volunteer for everything. Walk into the dangerous stuff. Stay involved when involvement means putting your ass on the line. The young operators coming up now, they don't always understand this. They want guarantees. They want backup plans and safety nets and assurances that if things go sideways, someone will pull them out. I get it. I understand the desire for security. But that's not how real operations work. Real operations mean walking into situations where you might not come back, making decisions with incomplete information, trusting your training and your instincts and your operational discipline to see you through when everything else has gone to shit. You do it because somebody has to. You do it because the mission matters more than your personal comfort. You do it because being a warrior means accepting that involvement comes with risk, and risk is the price of doing work that actually counts for something. The Soviets never figured out what I gave the agency during those 8 months. They knew I'd fooled them. They knew I'd been inside their operations gathering intelligence, but they never knew exactly what we learned or how we used it afterward. That's operational success. Not getting caught, not getting killed, accomplishing the mission, and living to volunteer for the next one. 30 years later, I'm still here. Still volunteering, still refusing to quit, still finding ways to stay involved in operations that matter, because that's what warriors do. We volunteer for everything going. We never quit. We stay in the game until the game won't have us anymore. That's it. That's the whole secret. Nothing more complicated than that. Period.